Okay, I thought I'd do one more talk on the general concept of love and how it fits in our lives before we get down to the actual practical work, the details, the change, transformation techniques that are so interesting. And let's look at the other side of the coin. I've talked to you about love as a positive thing, what it really means in our lives. Oh, yes, I mean, love can never be a negative thing, but we either have love, which is positive, or we're kind of short of love, love starved, if you like. And it seems to me there's a lot of that going about at the moment. What would life really be like without love? Well, Thomas Hobbes had a famous phrase which seems to me to apply just as well to the situation of being without love. Human life, he said, would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. In other words, pretty horrible. Now, that's from his book Leviathan, which was a political treatise. But I'm sure you'll agree with me that that's painting a pretty awful picture of life without love. And yet we seem to be kind of going that way in a way. I mean, what he's talking about is a society of every man for himself, nobody cares about anything else, all fighting and scrabbling to the top, don't care who you get rid of on the way up. And to me, certainly in modern America, it's becoming a little bit like that, quite a lot like that. But of course, the rest of the world is following on to a degree. I think, a lot of the world, although they're critical of the USA, still would like the USA lifestyle, understandably so. But, it's getting pretty harsh. You can see it in traffic, for example. People just selfishly cut each other up and, shove somebody off the road. I go for walks several times a week, and as a pedestrian, I can tell you it's pretty dangerous out on the streets in America now. Things are so bad. You probably know Stephen King, the famous horror writer. He was knocked down and nearly killed while he was, by a car that was just driven badly and out of control. I live in Las Vegas, and here in this city, over about 170 pedestrians a year are killed just in this one city. I mean, it's pretty scary if you think about it. Anyway, I wonder if any of you have heard of something called the Popcorn Report. I've had it on my bookshelf for years. It sounds like something to do with eating, but in fact it was written by a lady called Faith Popcorn. I don't know if you can see it from there. It was quite famous in the early 90s, and the important point about the Popcorn Report is that she was predicting that we would all become more isolationist we're now in the future, of course, but in the 90s she was talking about more and more people retreating behind locked gates, electronically controlled gates. Gated communities are a big thing around here. I live in one, and I love the extra security that it brings. We've lived on with a house on the street, and we've lived in a house that's inside a gated community. I know which I prefer. But, I know my neighbors. Now, one of the surveys that was done recently is over 30% of people just do not know their neighbors. They don't interact. They don't act in a friendly, warm way. I make a point, when I'm going out walking, of speaking to all my neighbors, and there's 4 or 5 of them right nearby that reciprocate with, sometimes for a chat and time of day, but at least I get a smile or a wave or an interaction. So we're not completely starved for neighborliness around here. But anyway, what Faith Popcorn's later predictions didn't turn out to be anywhere near as accurate. But she made her name with this sort of isolationist prediction that's gradually coming true. I mean, you can go to countries now like Brazil, where the rich people are retired behind big walls. They have locked electronic gates, and if anyone tries to get in, they just shoot them. It's a bit like that here in the USA, of course. The trespassing laws allow a person to defend his or her territory by shooting, and even allowed to kill somebody. I find that pretty grim. And there are horrible stories, somebody knocking on the, stranger, not an American, someone who didn't know the rules, knocking on the door for some help, their car broken down. The door opens and the householder just guns them dead on the doorstep without even asking what they wanted. So that's the way life is tending to go. Of course, we all have our family, our immediate family and friends, so maybe we're not so aware of this. But what it really amounts to is loneliness, disconnection. And I think a lot of people may now know that there's a kind of epidemic of loneliness going on. I mean, I've heard these words used. People just feel lonely, and the surveys and estimates vary, like 30 or 40%. In certain groups, it's as high as 50%. Well, who are these people who are facing loneliness? I bet your first thought would be obviously the older people over 60. Not enough people visit them. They're not cared for as much as they should be. They're feeling out of it. Well, let me tell you, you've got a horrible shock coming. They're by no means the loneliest group. In fact, they're one of the least lonely groups, older folks. The people that really suffer are kids in the 18 to 24 bracket. They have various names like millennials and so on. Doesn't matter. Youngsters, young people are feeling terrifically lonely and isolated. What's all that about? I mean, you can see they're very good on social media, and they're, always on their phones and talking to somebody. How can they possibly feel lonely? Well, a number of scientific studies have shown quite clearly that social media and this kind of calling people all the time and looking yourself up on Facebook and taking selfies, science, real studies, real surveys have shown that is making people lonely. Because what a lot of sad people don't get about Facebook is it's a complete phony. It's a manicured, isolated, put up, stuck up, pretend world. People aren't really like that. All you ever see going by is the sort of perfect life, the perfect picture, the perfect baby shots, the perfect dog and cat shots. That life isn't like that. So people are being made to see this idealized, actually very silly sort of life. I mean, if you go on Facebook, you'd get the idea that human beings are just bone deep stupid. I mean, the things they do and the things they consider valuable are almost worthless in any estimate of real human values or real life values. So, people are being gradually dragged into this world of fakeness and unreality, and they envy it. Of course, it looks so good. Of course, it looks good. The pictures are even sometimes photoshopped and manicured to make them look really good. So it's not a real world at all. So far from helping out, it's actually making things worse, and that's probably the main reason that this younger group feels so isolated about things, is because they're in the thick of it. People in the 50s, 60s and 70s, they're not so good on social media. Some of them have hacked it, but the majority haven't. And even if they had, they don't want to find their life by looking on Facebook and seeing what all my friends are doing, or what family and friends of friends are doing. I don't care, for example. I have a presence on Facebook, but that's for professional and business reasons, but I hardly ever look on Facebook as to what's going on. I don't find my world there. I find my world outside the front door, the real world, or at night when the stars are out and you can look up and count the stars and see planets, and when there's a meteor shower. That's the real world. Gardening is a real world. Plants are real. Fake pictures on Facebook are not. And Instagram and all the others, of course, Twitter. I mean, how can you build a real world on 150, 160 keystrokes or whatever it is? Anyway, I don't want to overwhelm you with the sort of bad news. I really simply would like to work with you about the idea that love is something absolutely essential and necessary to human life. And without it, we feel lonely, disconnected and miserable. I call this state love starvation. To me, that's what loneliness is all about. And a lot of people are love starved, and they grow up love starved. They're not shown by their parents, not because their parents are swines, but because the parents are ignorant and very inept too. And generation by generation, we're not getting it right. We're not understanding this love. This is why it's so important that you follow this series and learn it. So the parents don't get it, so they're not teaching their children how to be wise in love, how to make the right choices, how to find connectivity. and how to engage in the world without allowing negative emotions to swamp that out. You know, shame and blame, regret, all of those things. Shame is a terribly toxic emotion. It's one of a group of emotions that I call the self-deprecatory emotions. Putting yourself down emotions, you know, a bad reaction to self. You should never do that. Never do that. And that's where love comes in. Love is the opposite of this. It's the opposite of love starvation, the opposite of loneliness, and the opposite of this isolationism and shrinking of self. So it's very important. You'll remember from the first talk, I directly related our being, our spiritual nature, our very life and existence and worth as the amount of love that we're connected with, the amount of love we're putting out there, and how big a space, how big a territory we occupy and can influence with love. The opposite is to pull in. And if the only territory you've got to manifest love is the interface of a little smartphone like that, you can see how that would be terribly isolating in a way, wouldn't it? It would make you think that you were less than important, less than worthy, and all these other negative things. Okay, so that's enough of the sort of theory of loving, if you like, life with love and how golden and wonderful and divine and sacred even, and life without love, which is very harsh. Remember, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish and short. I keep misquoting that. Solitary, poor, nasty, brutish and short. That's the opposite, and we don't want that. And our world is sliding in that direction, I have to say. It's driven that way also. I've talked about social media. But what about television? You know, it's a whole cavalcade of fake values, of pretend happiness, pretend success and cleverness. You know, if you watch TV, you get the idea that every smart dressed criminal with his polished shoes is a really smart guy and doing well. No, they're desperately, miserably unhappy. Their lives stink. Nobody likes them. Nobody loves them. Nobody trusts them. Nobody would go near them. They haven't got any real friends. Every single one of them would shoot them dead for the gain of a few dollars. That's not love, that's not life. So it's what I'm trying to say is that television is phony. That's the point. I'm not here to knock the mafia. I'm here to say that the pretend lives of criminals that you see on TV, it's totally phony. You get totally unrealistic love stories where people supposedly claim to love each other and be in love, and yet they treat each other with appalling venom. It seems to be the accepted thing that you can shout and scream and be vicious with your partner, call him a dirty dog or a lousy bitch, and that's everyone's entitlement. And you see this torrent of irrationality going on. It's not real, of course, it's fiction. But writers insist that, people are malformed, warped, twisted, dysfunctionally, emotionally dishonest, corrupt. That's what people are really like, aren't they? Well, no, they're not, actually. I don't know anybody. Well, yes, of course I know people like that. But, my immediate circle is several dozen friendly, nice, caring, particular people that I'm very fond of. They're not the weird, twisty, fictional characters. If you want to see some fictional characters that are good, go and read Jane Austen, for example. She has lovely people that get on with each other. Yes, there are some discords, but mostly the characters are nice. By the time you move on to Charles Dickens is, by definition almost, writing about unpleasant people, corrupting people that abuse and bully and exploit children, for example. That was one of the big things that troubled Charles Dickens. And then you've got modern stuff, of course, and to be modern, you've got to be vicious, nasty, clever. So, writing novels, television, movies. Oh, don't get me started on movies. There is such a thing called a feel-good movie. The formula is very simple. Nice people come together, then they start behaving like complete assholes and hurt each other like crazy, and then eventually they fix it up and it all comes back round to good. Really, I'm glad that life isn't like that, but I'm very sad that this is all that's being pushed at us night and day. Magazines, stories, television, the advertising is just as dishonest and corrupt, of course. Soaps and detective stories, torrents and torrents of what you might call people behaving badly. Well, there is an answer to this, and I've already said several times, love is the answer to it, but love is our own vehicle. If you're going out there looking for someone to bring you a parcel of love, or even a wheelbarrow of love, or a tanker load of love, you're going to wait forever. Things don't happen like that. You've got to do love in your own life. You've got to bring it about. You've got to be love, like I said, and then you've got to express that. Remember the be, do, have. If you can be love and do what you need to do to be a nice, connected person, then you will have love in return, and you will have loving friends in your immediate environment. Okay, I hope not too preachy. I just wanted to make it, just, I suppose, portray the slightly negative side. Life without love would be pretty grim. And by the way, loneliness and lack of love, they are associated with health issues. Again, scientific studies. It's been shown that a real feeling of loneliness is the healthy equivalent of smoking about 15 cigarettes a day. It will significantly shorten your life. Women who suffer loneliness have a 76% extra chance of heart disease, and all around is about the equivalent to obesity. It will shorten your life by around 20%. If you're experiencing loneliness, for one thing, it will overturn and damage your immune system, so your immune system isn't able to do what it should. Your immune system goes out of kilter and starts producing inflammation. Instead of settling it and quenching it, your body becomes inflamed. Now, inflammation is probably the number one aging factor that we all face. It's really very crucial. So if I didn't say it clearly, I'm saying it now, that loneliness, or what I call love starvation, is actually a serious health issue. It will shorten your life and spoil your life and ruin your health. That's how important it is. Okay, from now on, let's look at the practical side of things. The next set of videos are really what we can do to change how we experience love in this life. And I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. Thank you.